My name is Adam. I'm a clinical psychologist. I actually live in South Bend, Indiana, where I work at the University of Notre Dame. I provide therapy on a multidisciplinary team there for faculty and staff in the athletics department. So I don't deal with the students in terms of therapy, but I work with faculty and staff from all over the world, as well as the athletics department, which is a pretty interesting group. And then I speak across the country. For 7 years, I was an officer in the Air Force, and so I served as a consultant there to military members and to commanders. And now I teach at just a part-time basis at a couple of schools as well. So I've been in the field of behavioral health for 20 years. And so what I'd like to talk to you a little bit about today, Joey asked me to come out to talk about emotional well-being. I know many of you come here to the building, and emotional well-being might be something that comes along with fitness and physical health. So I'd love to talk to you a little bit about that. But I'd also, since I've been a clinician for a long time, I'd like to actually lead you in some things that I do with people clinically. Now, this won't be group therapy, but I hope it will be therapeutic, at least for some of you. So we're going to do an exercise together. None of you will be required to do it, but I'd like to lead you in something so that we could have an experience together of something that I think will be more instructive than mere instructions could ever hope to be. Joey said I only have 4 hours to talk to you. Just kidding. I'm going to be done in about an hour, probably. And at any point, if you have a question or a comment, or please feel free to interject or raise your hand. That's perfectly fine. We'll have this go the way that you'd like it to. So that's enough about me. I'm a father. I'm a husband. And in the last year, I've lost about 70 pounds, actually. After I got out of the Air Force, I did what a lot of people do after they get out of a career field that literally requires you have a waist size to stay in and gives you 5 to 8 hours each working week to exercise during the duty day, and I gained a bunch of weight. I wasn't eating well, and I wasn't sleeping well, and I was drinking too much alcohol. And then my wife got pregnant. Unexpectedly, in our 40s, we got pregnant again, and I had a big wake-up call, realizing I want to be very healthy. And so, when I work with people clinically, I oftentimes encourage them, find a why or a reason for goal-directed behavior tied to love and not fear or shame or self-contempt. If you connect it to love, you'll connect to an inextinguishable resource in your heart, like fuel that'll never go away. And so for me, it was, I love Amelia so much, even though she's not born yet. I want to be healthy, and I want to still be able to kick soccer balls around with her, or go to her high school graduation as a 60-something-year-old, as I was born in 19, none of your business, and be healthy enough to interact with her, a little bit, or at least intimidating enough for any significant other she brings around the house. So I share that not to necessarily pat myself on the back. I probably wasn't being very wise and self-disciplined to get myself into that kind of a health crisis in the first place, but also to say that you can have a doctoral degree in well-being, but still not live like that or eat like that. And so I think of all of us as just fellow travelers on the road of life, and perhaps we're all in a journey that'll continue through the rest of our life. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to tell you a few stories, because I think stories are way more instructive than instructions could ever hope to be. Then we're going to do an exercise, and then I'm going to tell you why in the world we did the exercise. And then if you have any questions for me, or we'll just kind of wrap up organically. I'll hang out up here at the end. Each of you should have a piece of paper and a writing utensil, and if you don't, I've got some extras here. So if you'd like to get that, it's going to be connected to the exercise. And then also, since I was a very junior clinician, I always shared with people research and books, because partly from a place of insecurity, to be totally honest with you. I didn't want people to think that they were only hearing like Adam's anecdotes in therapy. It's like, don't take my word for it. Like, take these really smart people. But also, it's like, listen, you're not going to remember most of what I say, but I'm going to throw a lot of resources and ideas at you, including some books, which actually might be the kind of thing that makes this all worthwhile for some of you. I don't know how this will land for any one of you, but for example, when I was talking to you about my weight loss, 90% had to do with nutrition for me, which set me on a path in the last year of reading the best research that we have from a nutritional psychiatry standpoint, which is a really fast-paced growing field, where in randomized controlled trial studies, the highest caliber studies that you can do, you take a group of people that have anxiety or depression, and you randomly assign some of them to medicine, and randomly assigned others to nutrition, nutritional biochemistry. And fascinatingly, when these studies are done well and controlled well, the nutrition group actually does a lot better. Not only at healing gut health, which is where our serotonin is created, but also in mitigating psychiatric symptoms. And so two of the authors in that space, if you're not familiar with them, Uma Naidu is brilliant. She's Harvard trained. Oh boy, these are really skinny markers. Let me see. Naidoo. Uma is her first name. Harvard trained. Also has a nutrition science degree and is classically trained as a chef. So she's sort of like a unicorn. You know, it's like, I don't know that you'd ever find two people like that in the world. What's fascinating about her book, it's called This Is Your Brain on Food.
Do you mind using darker?
Well, this is the darkest one, unfortunately. Yeah, I'm so sorry about that. This Is Your Brain on Food is what it's titled. Here's what I love about this book. If you don't have time in your life to read entire books just because some bald guy mentioned it on a Sunday afternoon, it's not meant to be read cover to cover. So, for example, if you have any experience with anxiety, for example, or insomnia, or depression, or ADHD, there's chapters in the book dedicated to each one of these things. You just flip it open to that chapter, and she'll go through vitamins, minerals, and food groups, which have been studied in these randomized controlled trial studies. But then the back end of her book is all recipes, because she's a chef. So it's brilliant, you know? It's like, at my house, we don't cook a lot with things like saffron, or I wouldn't exactly know what I would need to cook with to make sure that my family's getting adequate selenium and folate. But she's got recipes jam-packed full of this kind of thing. So she's a great clinician in that space, again, trained as a psychiatrist. So maybe for some of you, that will be the thing that was really valuable about coming today. Let me tell you a story. Several years ago, maybe 10 years ago now, I spent several weeks with some elders from the Navajo tribe, which is a Native American group of people who now live primarily on their reservation in New Mexico and Arizona. I lived in Arizona at the time. I had the opportunity to be a consultant to them, primarily for mental health and just general health issues that the tribe was facing. It was an incalculable privilege. During that time, I learned many legendary stories of that people group, and I'm going to share one with you. They have a story which is so relatable that it smacks as almost like there's got to be some truth to it, you know. They have a story of how they discovered the Grand Canyon. Have any of you ever been to the Grand Canyon here in the States? Or it's appropriately named. It's not a small canyon. In fact, the first time I took my wife there, we stood on the edge and she started weeping. And it was a time when we had almost no money at all. We scraped our money together. I took her on this trip, and I took her to the edge of this, and she started crying. And like a typical male, I thought, oh, this is going terrible. You know, I've ruined this vacation, you know. And she said something that I'll never forget. She said, it's both haunting and beautiful. Like, it's terrifying, and it's also beautiful. Excuse me. So anyway, according to the legend, there was a time in human history when things like that could exist, but everyone that you knew didn't know that it was there yet. There were no Google Maps and things like this. And so the tribes people had a tradition then when boys would transition from boyhood to manhood. I promise this has a meaning why I'm telling you this story. And around a young male's life, about 14 years of age, the tribe would get together and they would have a huge ceremony with religious regalia. He would get dressed up. They would have a bit of a feast. This was his transition to manhood. And for the only time in a young Navajo person's life, he would intentionally ride away from the tribe with intention to be gone for several days. Of course, this would have been very dangerous if you had just did that on a regular basis. And yet this was part of kind of a religious pilgrimage. Now I mentioned that the being alone is a vulnerable thing piece because all of the best behavioral science research that we have would suggest that basically the only thing that predicts lifelong flourishing for human beings is relational connectedness. Like money doesn't predict it, even health status doesn't predict it nearly as strong as being connected to a tribe. Martin Seligman at the University of Pennsylvania wrote a terrific book called Flourish, F-L-U-R-I-S-H, Flourish. And in that book, he has a PERMA model, 5 domains of human flourishing. The relational one is really the only one that actually predicts how people do. Harvard did a tremendous study over 70 years following the same group of people every year, collecting data on them. All kinds of data. Did you go to jail this year or not? What's your health status like? Let's get lab work done. How much money did you make? Are you married? Do you have children? All kinds of stuff like that. The only thing that fell out of that study as being really predictive of living long and happy lives was relational connectedness. So what the tribe was asking this kid to do was kind of immediately threatening, but it was also contrary, this religious tradition, to what would lead to a long-term flourishing life. So necessarily it was just a day or two. Now here's where the story takes a turn, and it smacks of something like so human that I think there must be some veracity to it. They hand this kid in, his trajectory towards manhood, a pipe filled with peyote. Do you know what peyote is? It's a hallucinogenic cactus. Like so hallucinogenic, in fact, that if you were to consume some of it or smoke it, you would go on quite a trip. And in the spirit of manhood, this kid takes the pipe and takes a man-sized hit of the pipe, hands it back, and takes off on his horse, chasing who knows what. He had already consumed a lot of the wacky cacti. I don't know what he was chasing. But according to the legend, this kid rode on that horse for like a day and a half until eventually both he and the horse were on the edge of something that his people had not yet discovered, the Grand Canyon. Now, according to the legend, the kid was so terrified of the specter of this giant void that he jumped off his horse, and the horse takes off, and he tied himself to a shrub near the edge of the canyon because he was petrified he was going to get pulled in and be lost forever. He must have thought he was on the edge of the world. And that was even before he had used the peyote. I don't know what this kid was thinking. But he was scared, and so he tied himself down to say, no, if you could imagine this as a movie scene, and the camera scans back, and you see a young person, terrified, maybe still hallucinating, far from home, tying himself down to a tree, you'd think, you're not doing yourself many favors here, man, right? Now, according to the legend, the people realized something terrible had happened. They tracked the horse. They eventually found this kid. According to the legend, they sort of lovingly untied him, and they brought him back to the tribe. And I never thought to ask, did he come back as a man or as a boy? Like, did this poor traumatized person have to do this all over again? I don't know. Here's why I share that story with you. I think it is so relatable to our human experience. When we are plodding through the normal transitions of life, and then all of a sudden, the ground opens up in front of us. Now, we might call that a negative life event. We might call that grief. We might call that a traumatic event. Definitionally, you know what trauma is? Trauma is something so difficult that we can't possibly comprehend it. That's why it drives us to our knees. And everybody in this room has had or is on the precipice of some canyon-type events in their lives. That kid couldn't have even comprehended that something like that existed, and yet there he was on the edge of it. And you know what's so relatable about his story? Is when we are scared, we will tie ourselves to almost anything that makes us feel safe. And it usually has to do with avoidance. Right? Like who in here does not relate to the idea that we can tie ourselves to distractions or hire certain things like substances or scrolling or screens or entertainment or sex or, you fill in the blank. I'm going to tie myself to this because I'm scared, but temporarily this makes me feel secure. This makes me feel safe, right? However, in the long run, that thing will kill you, or it could, right? Like the costs of that are so darn high. There's a phrase that we use in a lot of solution-oriented therapy that the problem isn't the problem, your solution is the problem. Right? It's like the canyon's gonna be there, pal, but you tying yourself to this tree, away from everyone who loves you, away from food and water and resources and life and a future, that's going to become your biggest problem of all. So I lead with that, and we're going to end with something similar to that, because what we're going to do in the middle here is an exercise which actually I hope will move us in the opposite direction of being avoidant or tying ourselves down to something. Now, many people who come to see a psychologist are there because of something that we might refer to as the problem of something that's present. So like many people will come in and they'll want to talk to me because they have depression and they want that to come down. Or they've had a canyon-like traumatic experience and there's symptoms afterwards and they want to be rid of those. Some people will come because they have a sleep disorder or anxiety or something like that, and I want that down. And I'm all for the amelioration of suffering if we can do that. There's some good treatments that we can offer to people that don't have the kind of side effects that psychopharmacology has, medicine, that actually does help people to feel less bad. But what I'm also interested in is not so much the problem of what's present, but also the problem of what's absent. Like, what have you radically amputated outside of your life because of fear? Like if that kid stayed tied to that shrub for a week, what would he miss out on? What has been the costs of avoidance in his life? Now, it's very human for us to engage in avoidance. I've got 2 young daughters at my house, and if they touch something hot, they'll immediately recoil their hand, right? When something hurts us, we immediately want to push back from it. But the costs of avoidance are so high when avoidance becomes the theme song in our lives. Sometimes people have avoidance show up in their life because they refuse to have certain memories. Some people have avoidance in their life by saying, my heart has been broken and therefore I'll never blank again. I'll never date again. I'll never trust again. I'll never be sexually intimate with a partner again, at great, great personal cost. Like you can almost like metaphorically just see somebody like just tying themselves down. And the pernicious nature of avoidance, right, is in the immediacy, it actually is quite reinforcing. It's like, shoo, so glad I don't have to deal with that canyon. But it's like, but again, you like to scroll the camera back. You're not doing yourself any favors here. So let me transition to an exercise. I'm going to invite you to participate in this if you would like, but you do not have to. If it becomes emotional or overwhelming and you want to stop doing it, then just stop doing it. I'm going to do it with you, And I'm going to do it with my eyes shut. And I would invite you also to consider closing your eyes for this, at least in part because I'm going to ask you to focus on some things from your past and your present. And it's easy to get awfully distracted when our eyes are open. I'm also going to shut my eyes so that you don't think I'm like staring at you the whole time. Like that would be strange. So I would invite you to do that if you'd like. This will take about 15 minutes or so for us to walk through this. It's something that I've borrowed from acceptance and commitment therapy. And it's actually something that I do with a lot of individuals at a place like the University of Notre Dame in one of our first or second sessions. Now, again, this is not intended to be group therapy, but I think if we were willing to participate in this, right, I think of the human heart as like a giant switch that can be flipped from either no or yes. Avoidance is flipping our switch to the no spot. I can't have this. I'm not going to try this. I don't want to do certain things. If we're willing to flip to the yes, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's easy or even that everything goes well. But it almost just like opens us up to be able to receive what might be available. So I'm going to close my eyes. And if all of you get up and leave, I might not even know. If you shut your eyes, that's fine. If you don't, that's okay as well. For today, the way in which we'll think about mindfulness is drawing our attention in a voluntary way to something that's happening right now in a way that we could be more aware of it and curious about it, or perhaps even a little bit more participative with it. Mindfulness, ladies and gentlemen, is not about relaxation. It's not about emptying our heads of thoughts. It's about becoming more aware of something here and now so that we can be more participative with it. And doing something like this, just 3 to 5 minutes a day, dramatically increases the likelihood that we'll accomplish goals in our life and dramatically reduces things that are unwanted, like anxiety or depression. Now, I know of no better way to do this than to draw our attention to sensory information, which is almost always available to us, but that we rarely pay attention to. And so, I would invite you, perhaps for the first time since I've started talking to you today, to draw your attention to what it feels like to breathe. You might notice the coolness of air as you breathe it in, or how your body warms it slightly and you can sense that on the exhale. You might notice a subtle rise and fall in your chest or your abdomen as you breathe in and as you breathe out. I would invite you at your own pace to just take 3 slow breaths in and out and see if you can notice what that feels like to inhale and to exhale. And as you continue to breathe, for many people, our minds get very busy when we do something like this. Random thoughts, judgmental thoughts, weird thoughts about things we have to... It's totally okay to have those. In fact, I would almost encourage you to visualize those as leaves that are bobbing down the stream of your consciousness. You don't need rid of them. You don't need to judge them. You can just notice that they're floating by and then gently redirect your attention back to what it feels like to breathe. Some people find it's helpful to visualize their breath as occurring in the shape of a rectangle, where they draw a slow breath in, forming a long edge of the rectangle, and then at the top of each breath, they're neither breathing in nor breathing out, forming a short edge of the rectangle, then a long, slow breath out. At the bottom of each breath, neither breathing out nor breathing in. There was a time in your history when you took your first breath. And there will be a time in your history when you take your last. And we find ourselves between those two breaths right now. And it's an extraordinary thing to be alive. To be conscious, to be present, to breathe. And as you continue to breathe in a connected, present, conscious moment, I'd like to transition to invite you to do a bit of a visualization exercise with me. If you're comfortable with your eyes still closed and breathing at your own pace, all of this is internal. I'm not expecting anyone to say anything out loud. I'd like for each of us to visualize ourselves in our mind's eye, seated in a chair. And to really do that, to see yourself as you are today, seated in a chair in your mind. And again, as you continue to breathe and you visualize yourself there, I'd like for you to bring to mind something from your past or your present that has been rather difficult for you recently. Something painful. It could be a canyon type event from your life. It could be a relationship. It could be something you feel very stuck in. It could be something like the problem of what's present. Something you've been carrying that's been heavy and difficult for you. And as you visualize yourself seated in a chair, I'd like for you to imagine that this pain could join you in the scene, that it would be almost physically manifested and sitting on your lap, and that it's there with you as you sit in the chair. And then I'd like for you to imagine that sitting next to you on the floor, next to the chair, is a small box, roughly the shape and the size of a shoebox. And I'd like for you to visualize yourself reaching down and collecting that box and bringing it up. And then taking the lid off of that box and taking this painful thing and sort of folding it in on itself and placing it inside of the box. And then placing the lid on top of the box and resting the box on your lap. And to visualize yourself now seated in a chair with this box on your lap. You're not rid of this pain. You've not vanquished it or made it even that much smaller. It's still with you. But now there's some edges around it, and there's a lid on top of it. It's contained, but it's still with you. Just to notice, as you see yourself seated in a chair with this box on your lap, what that might feel like. To have this with you, but to have it with you in a slightly different way. And as you continue to breathe and visualize yourself with this box on your lap, I'd just like for you to bring to mind that there's 30 or so people in the room, human beings, here with you today, that are each also visualizing themselves with a box on their lap. with something very painful inside of it. That there's something very human that connects you to the fabric of humanity about carrying pain. You're not alone in doing that. And if there were 300 or 3,000 or 300,000 people that were all doing this, they would also each be able quite easily to visualize themselves sitting with something very painful. Just sort of notice what that feels like. And as you visualize yourself seated in this chair with this box on your lap, I'd like for you now to bring to mind someone from your past or your present who was genuinely for you. Someone you actually knew. Someone who truly seemed to care about you, not in a perfect way, but in a consistent way. It could be a parent or a parental figure, a grandparent or a grandparent figure. Could be a dear, dear friend or a lover or a sibling. It could be a colleague or a coach or a teacher or a professor. It's just very important that you'd identify someone from your past or your present. And perhaps even someone who might have something kind or wise to offer to you in a moment like this. And once you've identified that person, I'd like for you to imagine that this person is going to join you in the scene. As you sit there with this box on your lap, I'd like for you to imagine that this person is going to pull up a chair directly across from you. They're going to sit down at the chair, and as they sit down, that their eyes make eye contact with yours. And for the sake of the exercise, I want you to imagine that this person has a fairly good understanding of what's inside your box. Not as painfully and intimately as you do, but that this person knows about what's in there. And as their eyes make eye contact with yours, that they're aware of what's inside. And I'd like for you to imagine what their eyes would look like as they look at you in a moment like this. Like the expression in their eyes. And for you to notice what it feels like to be seen and known and cared for in a moment like this. And to visualize not just their eyes, but their nose and their mouth and the shape of their face and their hair and their facial expression and how they might be looking at you in a moment like this as you carry something very painful. And again, to notice what it feels like to be accompanied and seen and loved as you hold this. And then, on the basis of how this person has cared for you in the past, the kindness that they've shown you, the reasons why you selected them to join you in this scene, I'd like for you to imagine if this person had just one sentence or one sentiment that they might want to remind you of or tell you related to this painful thing that you're carrying. One bit of truth wrapped in love, straight to your heart. What would it be? Can you connect with that? I'd like for you to imagine that you could almost hear it in the tone of their voice, what they would want to remind you of or tell you about. It might be something like, just remember, or you are, or simply you. I'd like for you to imagine that you could hear them saying that and to notice what that feels like to hear from them. And then you've drawn this person up from your heart and your mind, your memory network, This person has become integrated into who you are. That's how you can think of their voice and what their eyes might look like and the shape of their face. And this person has made some kind of impact on your life. And for the sake of the exercise, I would just invite each one of you to allow yourself in the depths of your heart to have a felt sense of gratitude that someone like this has ever seen you and cared for you. To imagine yourself looking back at them in the exercise with warm eyes and a grateful heart. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for believing in me, protecting me. Because I don't often do that for myself. And then just as you've drawn this person up from your heart, I'd love for you to just think about kind of intentionally reintegrating this person back into the framework of who you are. You could take their heart and put it inside of your heart, or take their face and put it behind your face, their eyes behind your eyes, their voice inside of your voice, such that in a moment we'll open our eyes and you're going to look and sound exactly like you do, and yet the things you see or the things that you say are undeniably influenced by how this person has loved you. And then I would just draw your attention back to what it feels like to breathe. The coolness of air as we breathe in. And how our body warms it slightly. And you can sense that on the exhale. Alive and conscious and loved and seen and human and here and now in this moment. And I'd invite you to open your eyes. Whoever you thought of and whatever they had to say to you, I would invite you to jot that down on your paper. No one's going to see this but you. I love doing that exercise because for a percentage of you, you just spent a little bit of time in your mind with someone that perhaps you've not seen or interacted with in a while, or perhaps is not even living anymore. I always think like maybe the highest calling I could ever have in my life would be to be that person in at least one other person's life, that they would think of me, as someone who genuinely cared for them, like the ghost of my kids past or something that loved them really well. I saw a lot of tears getting wiped when we opened our eyes. I didn't peek at you during the exercise, and that can be an emotional exercise for some, and for others it can be a cure for insomnia. So I just never exactly know how it's going to go. But I'd like to unpack why we did that, the necessary and sufficient ingredients inside of what we just experienced together. And I always ask people to write down kind of the wisdom that they connected with, because I promise you, if not later today, then definitely in the next few days, it would be wise for you to return to it. Like there's something inside of it about your worth, your dignity, or what's really important. And an exercise like that opens us up, and we're able to touch that, kindness and wisdom through the eyes of someone who's really loved us before in a way that maybe we don't do so well on our own. So let me talk to you a little bit about what's inside that exercise. The first part, with this marker that isn't very dark, I'm sorry, is mindfulness. There's been decades of research on mindfulness, being connected right now to something that's happening so that I could be more aware of and participative with it. Who in the world wouldn't want that? Right, like whether I'm playing with my 4-year-old daughter, or I'm eating a bowl of ice cream, or I'm having sex with my wife, or I'm watching a sunset, it's like, who wouldn't want to be really connected here and now? And on the basis of 20 years of working in behavioral health, I fundamentally believe that most of the time depression or anxiety is just disorganized attentional processes. People who are depressed are haunted with attention that goes to the past. What's never worked out for them, the bad things that have happened. People who are plagued with anxiety have attentional processes that always race ahead. I'm so worried about what's going to happen tomorrow, or in the life of someone I care about, or in the economy or the country, or in my career. It's very future focused. What's really sad about that is that if my attention is always pulling me to the past or to the future, I have no earthly ability to use my agency in either of those spaces. The only place that I can make choices is here and now. Which is why it's so powerful to practice mindfulness, at least initially, focusing on sensory information, because my heart only beats now. I only breathe now. And it's why all of our wisdom traditions, every religion, has a major emphasis on here and now stuff associated with love. Because love can only ever happen right now. I could tell my wife, like, Janine, I will love you in 2045. Maybe. But it's like, I only get to do that, though, in an action-oriented way now. Ancient peoples understood this. This is why, like, in many wisdom traditions, there's these ideas about faith, hope, and love. And love always being supreme. Faith is bolstered by what's happened in the past. Hope always anticipates something that's not yet here. But love enraptures the immediacy of the moment. Mindfulness, in terms of almost anything that you can measure, dramatically improves things for human beings. So mindfulness-based stress is perhaps the best empirically supported treatment, mindfulness-based stress reduction for reducing stress. Mindfulness-based eating is associated with major positive outcomes in terms of weight loss. If you don't know much about mindfulness, you can learn a lot pretty quickly. And just a few minutes each day, like what we just did, is a dose sufficient to bring about significant emotional and behavioral changes for people. One of the things that I do as a psychologist from a mindfulness-based standpoint, I see a lot of people who are addicted to screens, to porn, to food, or to a substance. An easy mindfulness intervention, if someone's willing to do it, is to put a piece of paper in their home somewhere, and every time they want to engage in the behavior, to just jot down the time and what they're going to do. When people do that, there's over a 50% reduction in whatever the behavior is. Like, it's an intervention in and of itself, if they do it in real time. Like, if you want somebody to quit smoking and they smoke a pack a day, that's 20. Statistically, it's really likely they'll come in the next week having only smoked, on average, 10 per day, because all of a sudden they start realizing, like, ooh, if I have to write this down, do I really need this? I don't know. If it's in the pantry, and every time they go in there, they have to write down, like, 16 almonds. It's like, as a psychologist, like, I don't care. Keep going to Pornhub for 6 hours a day. Do it. I'm not asking you to do it less. I just want you to write it down in real time. And all of a sudden, when people become more mindfully aware of what they're doing, they find their agency. And it's like, these cigarettes aren't using me anymore. I get to choose when I use them. Mindfulness is a powerful thing. So that's the first component of it. The second component of it, let me check my notes so I don't mess this up. I have a love letter in here for my daughter from my trip. Acceptance. Okay. Remember the Grand Canyon story? Acceptance for that young man would have been, oh, I'm scared. This is bad. My horse is gone. I had too much of the wacky cacti. And I need to do something next. Like, I can be with this situation exactly as it is without needing to hide. You know, as a psychologist, it's really interesting. I'll see about 8 to 10 people each day in my office. And which is why, by the way, I just feel like I win the lottery every time I get a chance to do something like this, because it would take me like a week to see all of you individually, right? We have a wildly inefficient service delivery model. It's horrible. Like, go to school forever and then just meet with people like 50 minutes at a time and like make this much of a difference. It's like, holy cow. It's just like so cool to just blast this stuff for people and hope that maybe it's helpful or useful to them. At 8 o'clock, somebody will come in and they're there to tell me that because they can't have children, their life is meaningless. They come in there to talk to me about their childless troubles. At 9 o'clock, somebody will come in and talk to me about their troubled child. At 10 o'clock, somebody will come in and they've lost all hope, they're suicidal, and they're planning on killing themselves. And at 11 o'clock, someone will come in and they've been diagnosed with a terminal illness, but they don't have grandchildren yet, and the thought of death is inescapably painful. They just want more time. At 1 o'clock, someone will come in and they'll say, I've never been loved, I've never been partnered in an intimate partner relationship, and because of that, I can't be happy. And at 2 o'clock, somebody will come in and they'll say, because I married this buffoon, I'll never be happy again. I should have never gotten married. Like, all day long, people are coming in telling me the exact same problem. But it's all the same sweet, sad human story. It's like, there's an aspect of my life, and unless it goes away, I can't have a meaningful life, or I can't move forward, or I can't have joy. We do this with psychological pain. I see this all the time, and it's true for physical pain as well. People will be like, I have an injury, or I have a depression. By the way, our diagnostic system is garbage. It's trash. If you've ever been given one of those labels, forget about it. Nothing's homogeneous in our diagnostic system. There's hundreds of thousands of different combinations that all get the same label. Like, what in the world is that? There's 600,000, I think, different combinations of symptoms that all could be used to give somebody a PTSD diagnosis. Like, could you imagine if there's 600,000 people in a line and they all had different symptoms, but we just gave them all the same label? What in the world? We have such a stupid diagnostic system that your dog or your mom or somebody could die and you're sad for 2 weeks and we'll give you a depression diagnosis. And here's a bunch of antidepressant medications, and now you're mentally ill. Like, stress and grief and sadness and anxiety, that's the cost of admission to living a meaningful life in this world. These aren't things to be rid of. Like if I have symptoms like sadness or grief or anxiety, and I just want rid of them, or I say I just can't have these, you know what I cut myself off from? Like freaking everything else in my life. Khalil Gibran, beautiful poet from Lebanon, wrote a book that should be on everybody's shelf called The Prophet. He's got these beautiful poems in there. One of them is called On Joy and Sorrow. And he talks about how joy and sorrow are inextricably linked. He says, like, the same well from which you once filled with tears, you now bring up buckets of laughter. Or the same flute that now plays such a joyful melody was once hollowed out with sorrowful knives. Your joy is your sorrow unmasked. Like the deeper you feel about something, all that is an indication of what you care about. I really believe that. And it's not just Adam's anecdotes. Acceptance and commitment therapy talks about this. Susan David at Harvard talks about this. Like your biggest emotions are signposts to significance in your heart. They're not things to be rid of. They're things to be able to sit with a little bit. Did you notice in the exercise that we did, I asked you to bring to mind something that was painful, and then you kept it with you the whole time? Like, you didn't give it to the person. They like punted it into the cosmos or something like that. It sat with you the whole time. You didn't have to drown in it. You could put it inside of a container. But we carry it with us. And if we're willing to have it, you know what else we might also have? Like somebody who could come and hear our story or see us in that. Someone who could relate to us in our brokenness. Acceptance versus avoidance is perhaps the fundamental aspect of psychological flexibility. And through the lens of your own lived experience, it would be like you saying, I can be with my life right now exactly as it is, and I don't need anything to change, and I still get to ... I still get to live. I still get to breathe. I still get to be seen. I still get to love. I still get to find things. But when I try to radically amputate things away from my life or distract or numb myself from it, it walks me in this eliminative, subtractive mode of being. And it cuts me off from a lot of really good things. That's the cost of avoidance. So acceptance is like, I can sit here with this thing. I'm not calling it good. And it may never really serve any good purpose in my life. It may have no redemptive quality in my life whatsoever. But it's here with me, and I don't need to run from it. I don't need to tie myself to anything that makes me feel safe as a result of it. I can hold it. There's this metaphor in acceptance and commitment therapy that your deepest pain, you could hold almost like a dried flower. I remember the first time I heard that, I thought that was weird because I haven't had much experience with dried flowers. But apparently they're very brittle. They're like delicate. And one of the things that ACT therapists encourage people to do is if you're willing to hold your pain and examine it like a dried flower, you can also examine its history. You can be with it. And you don't need to try to hide from it or say, because of this, I can't. So there's an undeniable aspect of acceptance in this. But also, and finally, this is an exercise about self-compassion. Now, I'm not talking about some grandiose, narcissistic American idea of self-esteem. That's a terrible idea. I don't think anybody on the planet needs more self-esteem. Right? If you've ever worked with or loved somebody that had a really high self-esteem, or a narcissist, it doesn't go well for you, Self-compassion is something very different. Self-compassion is finding the same kindness and wisdom I'd have for somebody that I really cared about, but for me. At 230 pounds last February, when I was going to watch my wife give birth to our second child in April, I had this shift happen in my head where it's what if I were to start eating like I actually gave a damn about what happened in my life in 20 or 30 years? I think of self-compassion as not about feelings and thoughts. Because very few of you probably wake up and look in the mirror and think, I'm a terrific human being. I just have a lot to offer the world. I'm a contributor. I am. I work hard. It's we probably don't do that a lot, right? And yet, wasn't that a beautiful, for those of you that found that exercise meaningful, isn't it a heck of a thing to see ourselves through the eyes of someone that loves us? And you know what that person didn't say to you? You're the most important person in the whole wide world. They didn't say to you, no one else in the world matters except for you, right? They probably said things like if I had a day with you guys, sometimes I'll do a day conference with people, and we're doing one aspect of 6 from acceptance and commitment therapy today. I'll give somebody a whole therapy experience in a day, which is about all that any of you should ever pursue anyway. I'll get on that soapbox for a second. If you go to a therapist longer than 3 times and it's not helping you, it's not going to. And the sweet spot for therapy is 6 hours. That's it. Gone are the days of Sigmund Freud when you and Sigmund would lay on a couch, do a little cocaine, and talk about your mother for years. That doesn't help. Just a small dose of therapy. If it's going to help you, it helps by that sweet spot. I just got totally sidetracked. Sorry about that. One of the things that I would say, though, about self-compassion, right, is When somebody sees me and cares for me and loves me, they remind me of things that are in my heart for everybody else. If somebody I really cared for called me later tonight and they're going through something really difficult, I could very easily come up with this kind of thing for them. Not narcissistic, grandiose bullshit, but actually kindness and wisdom. But I have a hard time connecting with it for myself. Now, we don't wake up and we don't talk to ourselves like this, but what if in our being and doing, like in how we connected to others, the things we put in our bodies or the things that we didn't anymore, the places that we went, the new challenges we took on, like for some of you, being a member here is a tangible demonstration of self-compassion in your life. And I hope it's connected to self-compassion and wisdom and kindness, and not connected to something like shame or self-contempt. Or else it's not going to go very well, because you'll never get big enough muscles or small enough waists or impressive enough VO2 maxes to ever beat out that shame thing. Like do it because you're a human being. Do it because when you were this little, somebody held you and looked into your sweet little eyes and said, "Hey, welcome to the world," when you took your first breath. And you're still breathing. And you still have that dignity and worth as a human being. Like, do it because you care about your future. Do it because you respect yourself enough to take care of yourself, right? Walk out self-compassion in a behavioral way. So that if somebody were to follow you around with a camera, they'd say, "She really cares about herself. Yeah, that lady in the purple sweatshirt, she's like careful about what she eats, and she laughs a lot with people that she cares for, and gosh, she moves her body in ways which would suggest that like she's building a health span. And she challenges herself with new things." Like, what would somebody say if they followed you around all day long for a couple of days? And how you spent your time? And to what extent would avoidance versus acceptance be present there? Like, for example, the average US adult spends 4 hours a day on non-work related screen scrolling. Like, I just started thinking about that. Like, what might I be able to accomplish in my life if I just took back half of that time? Like 14 hours a week? Well, I'll tell you what I've done in the last year. I learned how to play piano. Like, that's easy. 14 hours a week's a long time. I do a lot of jumping on the trampoline with my 4-year-old. Right? Like, what might you do to walk out self-compassion in your own life if you really cared about what happened next? Kristen Neff, N-E-F-F, is sort of the best researcher in that space for self-compassion. And to draw it to a conclusion, her 3 prongs of self-compassion are mindfulness, universal nature of human suffering, and kindness or wisdom. Many people come to therapy because they're very hard on themselves. They've carried around this "I'm not good enough" story in their head and their heart for most of their life. You know what's really sad but also kind of sweet about being a therapist is sometimes I'll get to bear witness to kind of the origin of that story. Like how tall they were, how old they were when somebody really harmed them. It's like for a lot of you, the shame and the "I'm not good enough" story, that didn't even originate in your own head. Like somebody mistreated you or betrayed you or hurt you. Or as a prepubescent or a pubescent person, like somebody really, really hurt you. And you walked around the rest of your life thinking, "I'm not good enough. If people in here only knew, I just wouldn't even be accepted. I'm such an idiot." Right? Like we've all got that kind of self-talk in our heads. But today we did something different, right? Like today we connected with something else that someone might have said to us or did say to us. Like that's in there too. That I am enough, or that I am loved, or that I am doing it, or that I can keep going. or whatever that wisdom is. There's a song that I'm really fond of. It was written from a father to his sons when his sons were really little. It's a song from a long time ago, back in 19, none of your business probably. But, he's singing to his young boys. And he says to his sons, there will be liars and there'll be thieves who take from you. And not to undermine the consequence, but you are not what you do. And when you need it most, I've written down 100 reasons why I love each one of you. I remember the first time I heard that, I wept. I wasn't even a father, and I just thought, that is the closest thing I've ever heard to like unconditional. I mean, that is so beautiful that a dad would have the foresight that I'm going to write down 100 reasons why I love my sons. And when they're 21 or they're 31 or the world drops them to their knees with a canyon-like experience, when they most need it and they're tempted to think that their life is not worth it, I'm going to read that list of things to them. Like, have you ever been loved like that? Are you walking in the direction of loving someone like that? Right? To be that in your being and doing. I see you. In South Africa, a country that has been ravaged by apartheid and racial injustices, you know what the greeting on the day is there on the street? Like how they would say hello to a stranger. They say sawubona, which means I see you. And in seeing you, I bring you into being. That sure beats good morning. Right? Like, I see you, and I bring you into being. Like, we could get busy loving other people and building belonging into our lives that way without tying ourselves to a tree and hoping that something comes along. We could live our lives self-compassionately. Okay, I talked a lot. Most of you are still conscious and awake, which I always think is just a tremendous win for me, having taught college students a lot. Some of that material is a little heavy, and so I just am so deeply appreciative for you coming tonight. And I'm on like platforms like Instagram and LinkedIn at Dr. Adam Dell, so please find me there. And if I mentioned a book or a resource, or you're like, yeah, you talked about some things, but what I'm really curious about is blah, 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 I always respond to people in those platforms. Like, you would not be a bother to me at all. And I put a ton of this content into the interwebs that we talked about tonight. Because again, I just think our service delivery model is crap. And I think that this stuff is helpful for most people. And I just am so passionate to share it. So I know the taco truck will be there for 33 more minutes. So, I mean, listen, everybody's got priorities. Get out there and get some. I'm going to hang out here for a while. And if you'd like to come up and meet or talk, I'm so happy to do that. But thanks so much for coming tonight.